All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to this virtual event from Majors and Quinn. My name is Steph. I am a bookseller here at Majors and Quinn. For those who are unaware, we are a small independent bookstore in uptown Minneapolis. If it's your first time at one of our virtual events, welcome. We are so glad to have you here. Thanks for taking time out of your evening to join us. And if it is not your first time, welcome back. Thank you so much for continuing to support our virtual event program. So I am so excited to this evening have the pleasure to introduce Lenny Duncan, who is going to be talking with us about his new book, United States of Grace, and of course the wonderful Marya Hornbacher, who's going to be joining him in conversation. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book, please call in. I'll throw our phone number in the chat. Unfortunately, our website's having a little bit of an issue right now, but if you call into the bookstore, we are happy to ship that. We ship anywhere in the world. So definitely grab a copy. And speaking of the comments, please check in, chime in, tell us where you're listening from, tuning in from. And also, if you have any questions throughout the talk, shoot those in the comments. We will have a quick 15-minute Q&A at the end after Marya and Lenny's conversation. So with that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Marya Hornbacher. She is an award-winning essayist, journalist, novelist, and poet, and the New York Times bestselling author of 5 books. She is the recipient of the Annie Dillard Award for Nonfiction, the Logan Fellowship for Social Justice Journalism, the White Award for Magazine Journalism, the ASACAP Award for Music Journalism, and the Fountain House Humanitarian Award for her activism. She teaches nonfiction, fiction, and poetry in the Master of Fine Arts in Writing program at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. So I will turn it over to you two. Have a great combo, and I'll be back at the end for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steph. And thanks so much, Majors and Quinn, for having us. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Lenny, to sort of my town, our town. Welcome to Minneapolis and all of those. Yes, it's amazing to have you here. My goodness. Do you mind if I just spit your bio out? Because it's amazing. And then we'll have you jump into the reading.
Yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
my friends. I am honored, honestly, to be in conversation with Lenny Duncan. This book of his, United States of Grace, is one of the best I've read in a long damn time. His first book, Dear Church, was also absolutely beautiful, but it's always amazing to see a writer bound forward with their second work. So a little bit about Lenny. Lenny is a public theologian, writer, witness, agitator, and pastor of the Jubilee Collective, a community in Vancouver, Washington, organized around the idea that maybe Jesus is anti-racist and loves queer, trans, and two-spirited people too. I hope so. Lenny spent most of his teens homeless after leaving home at the age of 13. He spent time in all 48 contiguous states, sleeping by the side of the highway or in penthouses along the way. He's been a prisoner of war in the so-called war on drugs. After systemic oppression and drugs didn't kill him, Lenny found himself in a strange place, the church. Today, Lenny serves as a public theologian at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California, bringing BIPOC and LGBTQIA perspectives, hermetic, and ethics to a theologically liberating 2-year certificate program being created in partnership with the Reverend Dr. Donna Allen and PLTS. His pronouns are he, him. Lenny, it is an honor to be here with you tonight. Please share with us.
It is an honor to be in conversation with you. That was your bio is pretty intimidating. I'm going to read from Blackness is a Revelation, chapter 3, at Marya's request. So blackness, it is a state of being, consciousness, and heritage, and can be an existential threat. It is something you are born into, and it can be a revelation. It can suddenly streak across the little world of a Black child in this country with crushing consequence and power. Blackness is beauty and glory. It is hushed whispers along riverbanks with the promise of freedom around the next bend. It is cousins who go to Jack and Jill of America and historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs for some of you who don't know. It is afro puffs and braiding and plaiting your sister's hair. It is barrettes and grease and wriggling little bodies who ain't trying to get their hair done. It is a siren call into a long line of ancestors and forebears who watch you with love and concern. Blackness is the way you move, the way you talk, or it isn't. It's what you call music and culture, or it isn't. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is freedom to be in the ever-tightening noose around your neck. It is the first time you heard Midnight Marauders or the second time you went to a dance. It is a state of being that is policed and denied. Blackness will yell at me online for trying to define it and will make up with me later at dinner next Sunday. It is the touchstone of my life and a weight on my shoulders. It is the forming part of my very personhood. But if you ask me what it was, I would be at a loss for words, not because I don't have a lot to say, profess, sing, write, proclaim about it, because it is massive and expansive in its life and history, with horizons far beyond what any of us can see. It is the plumb line of my story and the thread that binds my life together. It's who I am. Blackness can be questioned, put on trial. The questions start in the schoolyard and can last well into graduate school and beyond, in my experience. Blackness is policed by white supremacy. And sometimes those who have the deepest scars from its radical evil are themselves warped by it. They start to police blackness. They start to play the same purity games of the oppressor. They dress it up in righteousness of the cause and aim finely sharp spears and swords at your most tender areas. They can poke and cajole you to act out and strike back. I have learned not to fight back against these folks, and mostly I just weep for them because they have been so damaged by evil. They live out these patterns. Blackness can be painted into murals that would make the angels weep and make God pause the entire cosmos from expanding just for a moment to listen to the deep brown, tan, caramel, and black colors sing their song. It can raise its voice and make you stop in your tracks and to hear the words spoken by blackness. Blackness can change the very nature of language. We communicate now with so much stolen blackness, we don't even think twice about it as white America tells blackness how dope it is. Blackness is sore knees and my grandfather's long bus rides home. It's the older cat in the corner who goes outside and washes and shines and waxes his car to the sounds of the Delphonics every Sunday with religious reverence. It's a nod across the whitewashed room as you suck in your breath and prepare for the maelstrom of microaggressions and macro hatred that this country is right now. Blackness is passing someone at work, and when they ask you how it's going, you give them a deep, soulful look in the eyes and just reply, man, you know, and keep walking, secure in the knowledge that they do. Blackness is the cold calculus of always carrying your ID with you, putting your wallet in the visor of your car so your hands can always be seen when you're reaching for it, telling your partner where you'll be at all times, driving like an old lady through parts unknown because statistically speaking, the map ain't on your side. Blackness is what I am. It's what I know. It is the waters of my baptism, and the oil anointing my head is the source of my incredible pride and shame all at once. It is the cry struck at my throat and the tears I refuse to shed. Blackness is glorious, even in the United States.
Unbelievably beautiful. I want to get to big questions in a minute, but first I want to say the lyricism in your work. I hear so much of the beauty of rhetoric, of preaching within that, the rhythms of that. Can you talk to me a little bit? Just humor the poet in me. Where is your style from? What are you drawing on musically, rhetorically, in terms of preachers and poetry and literature? Where is that coming from for you, besides you?
Yeah, I mean, so some people say I have a polemic, right? I didn't know what that word meant until someone accused me of having one. That's similar to some of the reformers. If you want to talk about it theologically, I'm really influenced by James Cone. I'm incredibly influenced by all kinds of other sources too. I would say lyrically speaking, that all comes from early hip hop culture. You know, you got to remember, I grew up in West Philadelphia. So it's like when my consciousness is starting to expand, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, right? And what am I being hit with? I'm being hit with David Byrne, Remain in the Light. And then the next thing I'm being hit with is like Midnight Marauders down the back end of that 10 years later, right? And that journey from like that first time I grabbed a copy of the Talking Heads and was like, what is this? These words make no sense in such a way that makes the world make sense, right? And I knew that poetry was something you could play with. And then I started to really dig into hip hop culture. I was really influenced by a lot of stuff I read. I was a weird kid. I read Tom Wolfe at a really early age, and for some reason really loved the electrocooled acid test at like 8. That should have been a sign. I was really influenced by Langston, and of course, James Baldwin. But the funny thing about my influence around James Baldwin is that it's not his writings that I'm influenced by. I'm actually very influenced by his character and who he was in the public sphere. And some of the premises he made, that the only, from the struggle of the artists, right? The only reports we can trust at the end of empires is the report of poets. And by that, he meant all artists. And so I'm really influenced by that.
It's an amazing, what a collection, Byrne to Baldwin, you know what I mean? And hip hop everywhere in between. And Tom Wolfe randomly, I too, bizarrely, electric Kool-Aid acid test out of a used bookstore shelf. Why that appealed to either one of us, I can't say, but there we have it. It's amazing because when I listen to you, I also hear some of the incredible, beautiful rolling structures in Dr. King's speeches, but also like in his letters, in his writings. And so I wonder, when you preach, this isn't strictly to the book, but when you preach, when you speak, you sound to me like you speak the way you write. Is that something? Do they have a loop there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say I have a homiletic, and that's like the official. That's the term I'm like 200 grand in debt for. But I have a homiletic that's based off of, and I have a leadership style that's based off a simple premise, is that I'm going to be where the people are, and I'm going to talk about the things that the people are talking about it in ways that people can understand. Right. Now, you would think that would not be a mind-blowing thing for the church to keep up with, but it actually kind of is. And how I explain my leadership style is that I walk shoulder to shoulder with people. And so my point of that is that it only serves certain people in this country and in this world to make the divine inaccessible to the average person, to make it seem to be violent or strange or something that they can't really connect to. And so I try to preach. I try to talk how I'd like to talk. I do have a soaring kind of rhetoric. I do follow the average Black preacher skill, which is tell them what you told them and then tell them again. And so you get a lot of that, but and try to find poetic ways to stretch that out for people, to really have people feel it, to know that the written word has a way of touching us each in the soul and really lowering our disposition to one another just enough that we might be able to see the imago Dei in one another, or the image of God, or the divine, or if you just want to call it energy or evolution or whatever it is, that thing, right, that we're all looking for. Words have a way of presenting us to one another where we really do soul work with one another. We're like spirit talks to one another. Rather than if I would have sat down looking like this next to some of my readers, who knows how they would have heard my story, received my story, Mm-hmm. And so I do have some preacher in me. I like to imagine a lot more people are listening to me than really are when I write. And I'm a fool. I really believe that we could still make something pretty beautiful out of this land.
I want to go right to that. I'll come back to the matter of your reader and who you, when you write, are hearing or speaking to or hearing you. But I want to go right to the epilogue. So you were writing, at least as recorded in the epilogue, from the 29th of May, 2020, where here in Minneapolis, Floyd had just been murdered, and you are writing from the West Coast and saying, I am tired. If you don't mind me quoting the passage, briefly, you say, I have started to chafe at the role of witness. One of the things that I think is most beautiful in the epilogue is your description of, there's that beautiful sort of rhetorical flow to the passage on Blackness that you just read. And then by the epilogue, you're like, I'm exhausted. I would love it if you would talk a bit about how it was to write the book and then get to the point where you had to write that epilogue.
You know, you're good. Just thinking about the answer, like I'm already starting to tear up. Yeah, it's been a hard time for me. By the time I got to the epilogue, this is what had happened. My now ex-wife, or soon to be ex-wife, I had gotten her out of New York last minute before they shut it down for COVID. I had been writing United States of Grace in isolation by myself since February 1st in lockdown. No one around, none of my furniture, just me and a computer. And watching the news roll out, and trying to pitch this story about hope, you know, like trying to pitch a story, not about like foolish hope, not about a hope in our institutions or our history. They're broken, they're corrupt, they're evil, full stop. No, a hope in us and who we are as people. And when I wrote the epilogue, I ran as far as I could in the United States with COVID restrictions, literally to Fort Washington, because the indigenous tribe that was further up the road were standing in the middle of the road with, like, armed. They're like, you're not coming through unless you're a commercial trucker, you're not coming through our land. We don't know what this thing is. You're going to stay where you are. So they were turning people around. So it was literally as far as I could get away from everyone. And, some weird Russian news agency that had gotten a quote from me once 3 years ago calls me, and she starts to describe what happened in the Twin Cities. The whole reason I went out there, because I knew it was going to be bad, and I didn't want to see. I was tired of looking. I think God calls us to and I'm not talking about Jesus or the God of the Israelites we stole or any of that. I'm talking about that thing that's trying to save our collective asses and steps into human history, and you can experience it as collective liberation or salvation, whatever it is. For a long time, because of a lot of stuff I had done in my past with addiction and just other stuff, I felt like it was just my job to watch and to chronicle and to hold stories. That, I would do this little thing in the church and that was it. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I changed after that. I actually hit the ground running. And I don't talk about my activism here in Portland a lot. I don't talk about the organizations I'm connected to. I don't talk about the mutual aid work we're doing. I don't talk about the fact that Ted Wheeler allowed a homeless person who stole food to feed himself this morning be shot by 20 cops. 20 officers couldn't get a houseless guy out of a 7-Eleven today, Ted? I mean, not to mention that by the time I get down to the Justice Center, we could literally watch federal troops take live orders. We assumed from the president at this point, after his Vanity Fair interview 2 days ago, where he admitted he was giving live orders and he wished he would have sent the National Guard in just to kill us all. Yeah, check out Vanity Fair this month, team. But, I just knew. None of the major religious leaders were saying anything. They're all just, any national bishop at this point's absolute. How could they even face their people? How can the bishops in Minnesota face their people marching once or twice? Are you kidding me? Black Americans had an existential crisis in this country. The worst one in half a century. And it was amazing who showed up, because I want to give credit to those who did, right? And those who didn't. And how was I supposed to know? I thought I was in Portland away from the action. Within 15 days, thanks to CNN, Don Lemon and the rest of the crew over there, and Fox News and a few others pumping up a few things that happen here. All of a sudden, we're in the center of something that didn't even happen here. We don't want to be the center of the story. Like the whole, it's a mess. And now we have unmarked agents snatching people off the streets of America. I mean, you know, this is a week after the epilogue, after I make this turn to go out there and I figured if this was the end of Black people, that I'd rather die with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like the end of Black people for a long time here in Portland, at least.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's so few of us.
Mm-hmm. It's a very white town.
Yeah, sorry, that's a long answer. So yeah, that's where I was, and you know, and I had to like learn something from that. You know, and I think the biggest thing I learned is that the church is no longer God's chosen vessel on earth. We need to prepare the people for the world beyond the church. That we need to be counter system building. We need to not worry about if we can defeat Babylon. Like the big thing for real is we need just to build counter systems, because like if revolution's ever going to happen, it has to be just like any other Tuesday. Some guy has to be able to drive down the street and get a latte. It could be a community run latte thing, but he has to be able to get a latte and pick up a paper. It could be a community written paper, right? And there needs to be public safety, and there needs to be ways to address what capitalism has wreaked upon all of us, right? There needs to be systems. We don't need to announce it, and we don't need to demand it anymore. We just need to build it in our communities block by block by block. Because one thing the pandemic, you know, exposed to everyone is that they will leave you abandoned. The U.S. government abandoned us. And it was pretty strange.
Strange seems like a very gentle word for what it has been. But I'll give you it's strange for sure. So to the question of systems, but also of acting in response, or even in the wake, on the heels of a complete meltdown of structures, and also a kind of obvious natural result of the structures that we actually have. So, I mean, to say like, oh, what happened? That's not at all what I'm implying. What I'm saying is that as a natural result of this country having been built the way it has been built, right, since you are in a position now as witness, and to go back to your line, you know, I am exhausted by this role of witness. As witness, what is the role and what is the potential, perhaps, of writing and story, as you're saying, to hold these stories, you know, to create a space and perhaps give voice and amplify voices of storytellers? What's the role of writing in all of this as this shift takes place, whatever it is going to be ultimately? What do we do with the stories?
Well, you're going to love this. This is incredibly heretical. We get to write the sacred stories of the future here and now. We get to write the scripture right now. We get to make George Floyd what he really was. We get to make the heroes of this uprising what they really are. We get to write them as prophets. We get to write them as preachers. We get to write them as heroes, right? We get to decide what is Zion for us. We get to decide what is love for us. And we get to decide whether or not we want to talk about it in the same language that they have used all this time. And the writer right now has this very specific role, because we only know of Rome because of Homer.
Good point.
Everything we know of Rome is from Homer, right? And obviously Homer, that's why we use that term Homer, you know, for sports teams. You're a Homer for your sports team. That's why we say it, because this was obviously a dude who loved the empire, right? He loved all the principles of the empire, right? And so what does it mean that none of us really love the principles of this empire that was formerly a republic? And what does it mean that the republic died January 6th of 2021? And it's over. The only truly American miracle, and there's only been one, is that a sitting general ceded power to a civilian government for the first time in American history. And it's never, world history, and it's never happened again.
Right.
And now it's up for grabs.
Right.
The only uniting principle of the entire republic, and no one seems to mind. Now, here's the thing. I assume if I thought of something, I'm broker and dumber than the people who thought of it before me. And they're like 10 steps ahead of me. That's a general principle I operate under. And I'm just really concerned where we're headed if we continue to think that we can fight for a piece of a thing that's dead already. You know, I understand the importance of legislative work. I understand the importance of organizing. I'm organized by organizers. I'm not an organizer, right? But what I'll say is, as watching it from my perspective, we'd be better off trying to take care of one another. I think you and I are the true gift of the Republic. We're the Republic. We're the thing that's worth preserving. We're the gift. I think that's where the church gets it wrong, and that's where our nation gets it wrong. You know, we're the sacred thing in this story, not them.
You know, on that, the very opening passages where you talk about this book, this particular book, United States of Grace, as a love letter of sorts to a country that is by no means purely lovable. At best, perhaps it's redeemable. And what I want to ask then is how now, post-book, now that you have written this book and as you are looking at the world unfolding as it seems to be happening every 15 seconds, I want to ask you about the question, the word really redemption, right? And redeemable, perhaps. I want to go to the line in your intro where you say, you know, we have increasing evidence. I'm paraphrasing right now because I'm not going to pull up the book, but increasing evidence or reason to believe that there is a certain lack of redemption to what we have. What I want to ask is, both as a citizen and as a writer and as a spiritual practitioner of any kind, what do you think, as you look at where we are, how do we perhaps write our way forward to something that is redemptive or at least redeemable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we have to adjust what victory means. Victory does not mean that we will end up like the very people in the very seats of power with the very reins of power or the very systems that we're fighting against. I think we need to readjust whether or not we'll win, right? Because I believe we will win, and more focus on like loving one another and building community right now. I think we're at a critical time. In particular, during movements, what we see are like leaders rise up and be taken down. We know COINTELPRO and ops are happening all throughout the movements throughout the country right now. We know federal agents are like implanted and all these things. It's the same thing they've been doing since the 60s. It's nothing new. But the difference this time is that there's no central leadership to kill. There's no one to arrest. There's no one person to disgrace in any organization. And so, you know, what they're really doing is they're just creating psychological conditions. So most of us will either die or be, you know, turn back to our addictions, have psychiatric events like I had, where my PTSD kicked in so hard I discovered I had ADHD at 43. You know, like, you know, as a result of being tear gassed and shot at by the police for, you know, over 100 days. And like, I really think that like, we need to adjust what we think is victory. The victory is you and I are here. We're talking to each other. We survived this. And how do we make sure that each other not only survive this, but thrive in an environment that is not dependent upon a system that after 2 months said, the best thing you can do is to kill Nana and go out there and get back to work. I mean, They told you what they thought about you March 2020. They said, you know, I mean, they told you who they were. And, you know, you should have just believed them. And they're not changing that. Biden is certainly not changing course. He's using some of the rhetoric of the Democratic Party to install some of the same laws that are going to lock up protesters, probably in the Twin Cities, for 10 to 20 to 30 years on trumped up federal charges, the same way they did the Panthers, the same way they did AIM, the same way they did the Weathermen, the same way they've done anyone who's ever resisted their thing. So what I'm saying is maybe victory doesn't lie in resistance. Maybe victory lies in love. Maybe victory lies in us retelling old stories. Maybe victory lies in us telling the stories of cliffs, you know, and concerts and whatever ontological and or archetypical Jungian thing you want to hold on to and call it a religion, whatever that is, right? And we need to start reliving those sacred stories out in public, in our books, in our art, in our writing. We need to put it everywhere. You know, the other thing that survived the fall of Rome was the graffiti.
Right. The art.
Right? The art.
On the walls,
right.
Yep.
The sculptures, the art, right? You know, some of the books, right? Poetry was a newly kind of developed art at the time. You know,
The
doing
drama.
doing historical lithographs, I think they called
Yeah.
it. You know, like, that's what they taught me. That's another thing I got for that 200,000 historical lithograph. But but that was a new art that was preserved. I mean, the lute, music. I mean, a lot of things. You know, the harp. A lot of things were developed in Rome that we only know of because of art and architecture and science. I mean, these are the things that are left behind. It's never the body politic. It's never what I said about you on Twitter. I mean,
Exactly.
Jesus.
I know,
Like, you know
right?
what I mean? Like, none of that stuff's gonna last. We need to build things that are gonna last, that are gonna show our children who we really are, and show our children's children who we really are. We get to recreate a world that's different, and it's clear that this country is headed in at least 5 different directions right now.
Right. Right. And to the point about maybe victory, the reframing of victory, the rethinking what that means, I have to think of Audre Lorde's comment, you cannot dismantle the master's house with his tools, paraphrase again, but like, that's not how it happens. It's just reductive, and it's also replicating. There's a sort of a mastery compulsion to, we're going to take this because you took it from us, and then it's just back and forth. It's a tug of war, and there is no forward movement to that. And so what I think you're talking about, or what I hear maybe as an artist and a storyteller, is that what we can pull from this wreckage, the phoenix is going to be the art. It is going to be what we can make of community, but also what we make as makers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so,
and we're redeemable.
Yeah.
We are redeemable. You're redeemable. I'm redeemable. That guy walking past my place right now, I don't like that guy. He's redeemable. You know, we didn't create these systems. We inherited them. Some of us woke up to our power and privilege in the midst of them, and some of us are continuing that journey. But at the end of the day, if you wake up in the master's house and you're looking around and you see someone outside lighting a fire, just don't say shit.
Right. Well put.
Like,
Yeah.
you know that person's doing it because they love you.
Right.
And there's some real beauty in, if I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose well. I'm going to lose on love. I'm going to lose on grace. I'm going to lose on every principle we have. I'm not going to compromise to the best of my ability. And when I do, I'm going to be accountable.
Right.
There's something beautiful in that too, right? There's been, so for me, it's like adjusting what victory looks like for you. Victory looks like for me if we fulfill our destiny, whatever that is for, this time, this place, this space, this group of incarnated souls on this planet.
Right. And as kind of as a person who thinks a lot about spiritual practice, I have to wonder if that is not in and of itself kind of the core of it. I mean, we've written about spiritual practice and life from very different angles, you and I.
Yes.
Simply from very different backstories. Though when I lived in Philly, I lived in Germantown, and that was the first experience I ever had of an urban community, feeling like I lived in a community. As much as they're like, who's the lady on the corner? That was fine. It was so much more like an urban sense of, you're here now, you're ours. What I want to see evolve out of that as a community and as an individual within larger communities, what I want to see evolving out of that is, how do we participate with less sense of restriction, any of us? I'm not talking about the imposed restrictions of corrupt forces, corrupt systems. I'm talking about neighbor to neighbor. How do I go downstairs? You know what I'm saying? How does that work for us?
Yeah, I mean, I really am encouraging people to go back to the old ways. There's a lot, and I've been talking a lot to white people about this. This is my speech if you're BIPOC and you ever talk to me privately, but especially if you're Black. But we have to go back to our old ways. Like, you had a story before you came here. You were Italian, or you were Sicilian, or you were Irish, or you were from a clan in Ireland, or you were from somewhere in Scotland, or you were from France, or you were from the Rhineland, or you had some Teutonic things that you had practices. You had a spiritual way of life. You had a way of interacting with the land, right? And somewhere along the way, clearly, looking back on history, your ancestors went astray. And in the exchange for whiteness, you gave all that up.
Right.
To become white in America, you give up a lot. And so, you have ancestral work to do, just like I do. Right.
Sure.
You have principalities and powers, whether they're psychological or they are or they are spiritual. They weigh on the white psyche.
Right.
And so, I say it's time to get into that work. That's what you do. That's how you get to know your neighbor, man. You do like the simple old things, like, like you bake them some bread and you sit down and you have a cup of wine with them and you get to know them.
Yep.
You have table fellowship with them, whatever that is, you start doing whatever those spiritual practices you're doing inside your apartment since March 2020, since everyone like grasped for everything they had, and start doing them in public, start doing them in front of people. Stop letting people like me professionalize spirituality. And I think the biggest thing is that, the reason policing exists in America is because we don't love our neighbor. That's why we refuse to do that simple thing. I don't want to know why my neighbor is homeless. I don't want to know why my neighbor hits his wife. I don't want to know why the kid around the street has to hustle. I don't want to know. I don't want to know why you're drunk and out front by my car. What I want to do is I want to call my armed concierge service to solve the problem for me, because I'm too much of a coward to build community.
Right.
I'm too much of a, and listen, it's all part of this, the system. I mean, listen, my buddy, you turn on the local news 6 a.m, top of the hour. He calls it he calls it 120 seconds of pure fear. I mean, they run through the stories from the night before as if the entire city is under siege. Yeah. But when you really look at the stories on face value, you're like, okay, so a houseless person like really wanted food in downtown Portland and was probably drunk or having some sort of like, trouble with reality, and like laid down on the floor while he ate his sandwich, and 20 police officers had to come and then shoot him. Right. Or like, if you listen, you listen to, KOIN here locally in the morning, it was shooting downtown. Like it was, rah, and you're like, what? 20 officers deployed. And you're like, for what? What is happening, right? When really, honestly, if that 7-Eleven worker just would have pulled $5 out of his pocket, and like, look, I know those guys are under siege downtown. It's a shitty job, but like, why are you fighting for 7-Eleven? What's going on, bro? What is going on? Like, why are you out here capping for 7-Eleven over this dude's life? Like, what is happening to our humanity? And so, when we start to get to know people, when we start to build community, when we just go out and do it, and sometimes it's just going out and doing it. Just getting to know your 4 closest neighbors, know their names, know their families' names. That's a hell of a start, because you're less likely to call the police on Bob. Right.
Yeah. On Bob, it's a different animal. But I also, so the last thing, and I know we need to move to the next segment of this. Last thing I kind of want to ask you to speak to a little bit is beyond just, the need for intercultural, cross-cultural conversation. What do you, as a writer, what do you see yourself in terms of witness, in terms of creative practice, in terms of spiritual practice? Where are you going to go with this, the mission that I would suggest that you may be on creatively, spiritually? What's next?
I am going, I'm playing with this idea of living as houseless for the next year. I'm thinking about getting a camper and putting it on the back of my van and just like living houseless in Portland and in the Vancouver community, and just like live tweeting about it for a while. Real old things, having no home, having no place to call my own, having to live on the generosity of strangers, seeing what that looks like while I write my next piece. See how that goes for a while, obviously with a lot more privilege than when I was a 13-year-old houseless queer kid who was a sex worker, right? And maybe kind of live life from that perspective for a little bit. But I know personally for me, I am incredibly, I don't believe for me personally as a Black man or as a Black queer man, the church can be the sole sustenance for me in this republic anymore. I've really leaned into African indigenous spirituality. Have leaned into ancestral practices. I've really like leaned into my weird. I'm just going to be as fucking weird as I want to be all the time, and I don't care who has a problem with it anymore. What I'm really willing to do is that I'm willing to throw it all down to like move us forward. And I'm looking for people who are willing to do that, whatever that means to you in whatever area or practice you have. It's really time for us to like really kind of just start gathering. And I know I keep saying this, building these communities and building this time together because it just feels so important. So next for me is I'm thinking about hanging out for a year houseless and then opening up a retreat center on the Columbia River Gorge, kind of like hanging out with some folks. I'm working on a few books, and I have a thing that I can't announce for a couple weeks where I'll be up in everyone's face in like a real big way. But we're waiting. It's, you know, it got much bigger than me. I will be, I've got more than a few things going. But I really want to explore the connection between early African indigenous spirituality and the early Black church as resistance, and how the early Black church was really kind of designed as a you know, I always sum it up as master wanted Christians, so master got Christians kind of thing. And some of those stories, I'm just blown away by that. So I'm going to GTU next year, and I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm just fascinated by these stories of these mamas who were brought over here against their will, survived the transatlantic route, and then were trying to heal their children, but didn't know what plants were indigenous to the area and those connections to the indigenous tribes who shared that knowledge with them. But imagine, you don't even know what the stars are in the sky.
Right.
You know, I mean, wow. I mean, you know, you're trying to protect you and your family of this horrific thing, and you don't even know what plants to make your baby's fever to go down.
Right.
You know, you don't know what's safe to eat. You don't even know what direction the ocean is. You don't know how far this land goes. So I'm fascinated by these early stories of people who brought over Ifa and other practices and had these early interactions with indigenous folks, and how the church really tried to stop it.
Right. Lock down on that.
So yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I'm buzzing around in my head right now.
It's going to be pretty remarkable to see for you, I mean, where that leads as a story, as a piece, as a narrative and a poesy that emerges from your creative self.
Well, the biggest thing that popped up was I was out on retreat, and I'll be honest with you, I wrote the entire plot for 3 sci-fi books. So I really want to start writing about Black futurism.
Nice.
And you know, with a spiritual twist or whatever. But that's kind of I kind of want to expand. I want to get out of theology. I think theology is a dead language that leads to nowhere.
Yep. Did you, last thing, I'll you know, kind of an aside, did you ever read the Bishop Spong books, Why the Church Must Change or Die? Why Christianity Must Change or Die?
Yes.
I'd be interested sometime, whether it's today or not. We do need to turn some questions in. Let me just take a look here. Steph, I think we're ready for you to turn to questions. Lenny, if you're willing to take some.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys both so much for this. It's really been an incredible talk. I can't believe we've almost run through an hour already. I could sit and listen to you guys for ages. But yeah, if any of our listeners have any questions for Lenny about the book, about what they've been talking about this evening, throw them in the chat. I think I saw one a while back from Helena asks, do you have a favorite chapter or section in the book? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually it's the chapter Saint Nobody. I don't like to talk about that chapter a lot because it's like that was hard to even write about, but it's the prayer at the end. And I'll read that real quick. O Saint Nobody, patron saint of hitchhikers, roadside attractions, and waffle houses. You who smell of hope, promise, burn coffee and bacon, sweet guardian of futures untold and fates unknown. May you grant me this one boon, grant me the power and will, the holy anger and wisdom to burn white supremacy to the fucking ground with my dying breath. Amen. And that's a story of a near lynching, and I ended with that prayer. So I struggled if I was going to tell that story and the consequences of telling that story out loud. But yeah, that's probably my favorite chapter because it was the hardest thing to do because it was very real. It was very raw. It was these really traumatized memories where there's only like real, like, you know, crystallized moments and trying to draw the narrative of what happened, you know, out of like little Lenny, you know, and sitting with him and telling him that he's safe and that it's okay to feel this in his body now and all that stuff. Yeah.
Can I ask a question on that? On the matter of writing about trauma, specifically generational and specifically Black trauma. You talk very, very beautifully in both the beginning about the public perception, I think the popular perception of marginalized communities and the garbage pity that kind of gets overlaid over that. And you talk about the joy within communities, regardless of who, you know, the idea of marginalized communities is, well, if you see the white community as the center, yeah, all the other communities are marginalized, aren't they? You know, if that's your worldview, for sure, there you have it. But what you're talking about is like, this is my community. This is where, as you say, I reside. What I loved reading about was the tension in some ways between how do I express and articulate in prose both the joy within my communities, multiple, plural, and how tiresome it is to listen to the recitation of Black trauma. You know, how do you write within both spaces and across the whole spectrum of that, you know, because it's easy, I think, to go too far for a reader to go with you in either direction. So how do you hold that?
Well, you know, we were talking about this earlier. I think the surprising thing about United States of Grace is you pick up this book and you're like, another book about a Black preacher whose life was real fucked up and then it got better. And then like halfway through, you're like, I don't even know if this dude believes in Jesus. You're like, I don't know what's going on at this point. I think that's part of it. I think part of it is that, yeah, I think what United States of Grace attempts to do is it doesn't paint me as the hero. I'm actually the anti-hero of my own book. It's not a story about me. It's a story about the kind of people who surround you at some of the most vulnerable times in your life. And it's not always the predators. It's not always the vultures. It's not always the worst of us. In fact, quite a bit, it's the best of us. And so how do we tell that story, right? Like, how do I tell the story of what happened to me, but then tell the, you know, how these guys picked us up and, you know, try to kill us, but then tell the story of someone like, you know, 100 miles later stuffs $500 in your pocket and, you know, and explains to you who Henry Thoreau is, right? How do you hold those two? Because those are all things that happened to me in the same week, in the same country, on the same highway, to the same kid. Right. So they're all real. There is a gross focus on, and particularly in cheap media movies, we're seeing a lot of this in Black trauma and Black, you know, Black pain. You know, anything, and you know, I talk a lot about this when I talk about the margins. Anything Black sells. If we weren't the center of culture, stop imitating us. Give up rock and roll. Give up hip hop. Give us back like most of your dance moves. Give us back half the shit you like, you know, and then we can be the margins. Yeah, right. The language, all that stuff, like we, and then we can be the margin. But until then, like, you know, we're obviously what we've been since we've been here, the most profitable, exploited people ever kidnapped from their homeland, and then continuously kept in a state of imprisonment for 400 years. And all they've done is made the prison less easier for you to see. Right. So you'll accept it, you know? So,
and they're taking a cut regardless, you know?
Yeah, everyone's gonna take their cut. You know how many white dudes had the balls to write me after 2020 and be like, hey man, well, I was sitting in my house, just kind of lounging on my 401k, not really having to teach. I noticed how bad you black guys had it, and I wrote a book about racism, and would you be willing to endorse it?
Right. Yeah.
Right? There's a whole cottage market around this shit. A lot of these thought leader people, some of them are the worst. The worst. They're vampires. They're vampires. They're not living real lives. What they're doing is they're living an artificial personality that gets to comment on yours.
Right. Right.
And so
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so it's just another way blackness can be exploited. So now black pain will be exploited.
Right.
Right.
I was watching a play with my buddy who's a playwright, Mike Oatman, who's a brilliant playwright. And he's black. And he said, we're watching a play together. He goes, can't I ever just go get an ice cream cone?
Yeah.
And that element of just simple joy. And he and I just started like riffing on like, what if the whole plot was like you walk down the street and your neighbors were like, hey man, this is great to see you. Like what if that was the whole story, was the joy and the simplicity of it?
So, I don't know if anyone would get it, but I would pay money to be there for the opening.
Right.
I'd be there for, you know what I mean? Oh,
Yeah,
you get like Spike Lee to do it. Spike Lee does another dark look into the morbid history of the United States on Broadway. Everyone comes in for it, and it's just some black dude where everything goes his way.
Everything is right. Yeah, he has nice neighbors, gets an ice cream, goes home, talks to his dog, goes to bed, reads a book. You know what I mean? Like, what about simple joy?
Yeah.
And boom, 3 acts in all. Yeah, it's good. I want to take a look at India's question here. India's asking if you've read Toni Morrison, and if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have read a lot of Toni Morrison. I've read a lot of Audre Lorde's. I've also heard a lot of black men or cis appearing men talk a lot about both of those writers. And so I don't publicly talk a lot of, I'm heavily influenced by them, totally in love with their work, but for me, a lot of the movement's been about how can men, and then in particular, I think in a lot of ways, black cis men, I don't know how to say this delicately, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Just shut up. Like clearly this movement's been led by black women. Clearly black women have been the centers of this. And so what I try not to do is give armchair commentary on black queer literature, black queer women and their thinking. I you know what? I'll bet you $10 within 5 years we'll have dudes calling themselves womenist.
I think your chances are good.
I think the chances are real high of that. Like real high. Of that.
Clearly.
But obviously influenced by Toni, obviously influenced by Audre, obviously. And actually my biggest influence is probably Nora Zio Hurston, if you're paying attention to my PhD work. But you know what I mean? But like, I just don't know. I just always feel uncomfortable in those spaces. And it's because I made the mistake I talk about in the book. I would center myself around black women who are actually doing the real work and organizing. I would act like I was actually doing something when they were actually doing all the shit. And they called me out. And like, I just learned to like, kind of just interact with that stuff differently. I was telling a friend, I don't even like listening to Erykah Badu more than 3 times a year. And then I do like a whole discography because I feel like that's for black women. And I get to visit that, but I don't get to live there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm on my soapbox now. Sorry.
Let me just tip you off to the fact that India Burton, who is commenting, is a playwright in Cleveland, just staged a play called Panther Women that has
Panther Women,
sir, at Cleveland Public. Take a look at her.
I am on it.
She's a person to know, a writer to know. Thank you, India, for being here. I think you guys need to connect. Just because you're both damn good writers, among other things. But as the writer junkie in here, you guys need to know each other's work for real.
Yeah, Panther Women. I'm on it.
Panther Women, Cleveland Public Theater, India Burton.
I literally just wrote it into my last copy of my book, so I can remember.
Awesome. All right, we've got a bit of an echo. Are we? Do we have last comments in anything else? Lenny is dope. You are absolutely right. So is India. Steph, do you want to? You're way more knowledgeable about how you're running this end of this than I am. So I'm going to hand it to you. Let me know.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if anybody has any last minute questions, definitely throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I just want to echo some praise that people have been shooting in the chat. People have, like, that the reading's absolutely beautiful. Your, vulnerability and honesty are beautiful. And that just like me, cannot wait to pick up this book. And the truth that you're speaking is really powerful. And thank you really for putting so much of yourself into something that is so, easily accessible for the public, which is a really courageous thing to do. So thank you for your work and your time tonight and with this project.
You could tell you could tell the difference between like my first work, I got like some church cred, but this one, real writers like Marya are excited, right? Because there's a cost. There's a cost to something.
There's a cost.
You can tell when the writers paid the cost and when they're taking cheap shots. And there was a difference between the two books.
Yeah. I mean, it's the leap, as I said when we started out, the leap from Dear Church to this as a writer is just massive. Dear Church is beautiful, of course, and you're a heck of a writer in that. But what you've done intellectually and creatively in this is just elsewhere. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a beautiful thing to see as a writer. Just is as a reader.
Well, you tell National Book Awards that.
I will. I'll give them my heads up as if I have their ear, sir. But yeah, this is beautiful work. And thank you so much, Lenny, for being here, for talking to us. This is an amazing event. And thank you, Majors and Quinn, for hosting this beautiful writer and his work. Thank you.
Yes. And again, I threw our phone number up in the beginning of the chat. Definitely call in, order the book, support Lenny, support local bookstores. If you don't want to support us, find one in your area. Right. And just as a quick heads up, if you know somebody who wasn't able to make it tonight, or you just want to share this video with anybody, it will be public on our YouTube page and totally shareable. So you're welcome to come back to it or, show it to a friend as you need. And with that, Lenny, if there's anything you want to close out with, I will leave it to you.
Yeah, I guess my last pitch for the book is that it is a defense of the Republic from the position of a citizen who's never had the rights or privileges of a citizen. That I still, even like everything I've been through, like this is the land I know. These are the people I know. You guys are the air I breathe. If I don't learn to be at peace with you, if I don't learn to love you, then I'll never be able to exist here. And the same goes for each and every one of us. And so if you want to not read a story about someone who thinks they're the hero, but thinks you are, then you should pick up this book.
It's a gorgeous book. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Lenny, for the work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank everybody for spending the time this evening. I know we're all a little bit Zoom exhausted, so it really means a lot that so many of you came out to see us tonight. Thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of your evening. Bye.